Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to I don't know where that came from.
Hey, well, it was very nice. It was very showman-like.
Wilbur. I could go way old school there. Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to Unlearning Out Loud. If we had a British host, that would give us more credibility.
Right, might.
Unlearning Out Loud, episode 8, if I'm not mistaken. Which this episode is going to be really cool. This is did your choice choose you, or did you choose your choice? I'd like to say that 10 times.
I was just going to say that's a tongue twister right there.
Yeah, so it's like, did you choose to actually be here and film this podcast with me, or did something else make that choice? We're going to find out. We're going to talk a little bit about it, at least.
I'm ready to get into it. I'm absolutely speechless. Well, of course I would be here. It was on my calendar.
Well, the question is, how did it get on your calendar? Was that your choice? So we'll play this game later on. So I hope you stay tuned, because this is one of those pieces that links directly to the theme of what we're trying to do on this show, which is kind of turn over the stones and rocks and look underneath them in terms of what do we know about how the brain works, and what do we know about how that influences our behavior, and especially considering the fact that the one thing that no one disagrees on, it seems like at this point, is that everyone else seems wacky, right? Like everyone thinks everyone else is wacky. The world's going to, except for maybe their closest people. So that everybody can't be right. Something else has to be happening here. And it's kind of, I'm going to sound really pretentious here and probably assault some people, but it's a default for us to be intellectually lazy and say, it's just everybody else being crazy. And then not even think about how nonsensical that is, right? That somehow, you're part of a niche of people that have somehow figured this out. Yeah. And so it's and that goes back to what we've talked about the brain trying to conserve energy. So I call it intellectually lazy, which is sounds hostile, and I don't mean it to be. There's a gnat flying right in front of my face. So if I go like this randomly, because if you don't know, I am a plant person, and the more plants I bring into the house, the more of these little boogers are everywhere.
Tell you what, I had that same problem last year. Maybe this is my stuck in my craw. I'm just waiting for those little suckers to come back. That's why there's a drought going on in my plants, because I'm scared to water them. I don't want those things coming back. They're horrible. They get in your food. They go up your nose. They buzz your ears. They're nasty.
I found there are a couple great tricks that work. There's the little adhesive things you can stick in your plants that they stick to, but they're kind of ugly. And then they have the little ones you plug into a light socket, and you put a little adhesive thing that sticks in that makes a little blue light, and it draws them in, and that thing draws all kinds of them. But there's so many of them this time of year, especially in Arizona, which God knows what season it is. We only have, if you're not in Arizona, one of the people listening around the world, we have 2 seasons here in Arizona, hot and hotter. So we're currently right in the bridge between hot and hotter. So anyway, let's get into it. Let's talk about, you got anything going on in your world real quick before we get started?
Sure. So we are filming this episode at the end of March, and my granddaughter and I'm not making a political statement when I say this, but my granddaughter and I did go to the political rallies that were held this past weekend. She was very interested. She's 14. So, high schooler, interested in, what's going on in the world, has opinions. I mean, she has opinions.
What, a 14-year-old with opinions?
A 14-year-old girl with opinions.
Figure.
So she was interested in going. So we went, and she was able to see civics in action, which I'm actually glad that she got a chance to do that. And, we had conversations around First Amendment speech and what does it look like when you're in a democracy or not a democracy, or what are those things that differentiate between different types of governments around the world? It was just a really, really great day for her to see things that we talk about from a book in a classroom actually happening in real time. So it was. I'm glad that she was able to experience that, and that I had the chance to do that with her.
Well, it's one of those, we've talked about, this isn't a political show by any stretch, even though we're both, very interested in politics, especially being, educators and ex-educators, it had such a direct impact on our work.
Yep.
But we have to avoid this fear that we have as a nation of mentioning anything that's even adjacent to a topic, because contrary to popular belief, people always say you shouldn't, don't talk about religion and politics. Well, the founding fathers would disagree completely with that notion, right? I think I've talked about this before, that this idea that we would be afraid to talk about this kind of stuff is exactly what is how democracies do die. You're supposed to be having these conversations.
That's right.
So the idea that, I always like to think about if I could go back in time and someone said, hey, would you like to go back and see a civil rights rally or your Kent State rally? I wouldn't want to be in the wrong spot at the Kent State rally or any of those historic, any of those, just big public displays.
Million Man March. I mean, that's another one. Yeah.
20 years, those will be history. And so, it's as long as you can be there and not be, adjacent to trouble or, riffraff that are, that kind of lose the focus of what's going on. And that would, if somebody asked me, would you like to, be with some of the peaceful people that got to see January 6th even, I would say yes, because that was a historic moment, right? I wouldn't want to be anyone crashing through gates and hanging off the front of the Capitol building. But of course you'd want to be there, hear what people are saying. Like that's America in action. That's history. But again, as long as we keep it cool, right? No scaling.
That's it. And the people that we were around were lovely, and there were no, aggressive or rude or out of line people that we were around. So it really was a good experience for her.
And in a future episode, we're gonna have to talk about how unlearning about what most protests actually look like and how the media, what they sell in terms of visual imagery, sometimes not bad intentions about, finding the less than 0.5% of people that did something they weren't supposed to do. And there's not a lot of time spent on the, hundreds of thousands of people that didn't do something, right? Or were just peacefully protesting. So,
that's right.
So great. Well, on my end, I know we were getting ready for the show. You were asking about my bright yellow shirt.
Yes, I was. So let's see.
So this will be my happenings. If I sound a little like Miley Cyrus today with my voice, it's because I was at this show just last night, late. And so it's a band called Des Rocks.
Des Rocks.
And it is very, 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 very. It was one of the best concerts I've ever seen at the Rebel Lounge, which is kind of a classic, historic Phoenix venue for rock music. Used to be the Mason Jar for people who live in Phoenix.
Oh, okay.
So this band, Des Rocks, is incredible. They play at they played a venue last night in Phoenix, which is pretty historic, called the Rebel Lounge. So it used to be called the Mason Jar for those of you who live in Phoenix. Just been around forever. And went to the show last night. It was electric. And if you put Queen, Muse, Prince, Kenny Loggins, and Kaleo in a blender with Elvis, this is what you'd get. One of the most eclectic, energetic, high energy shows I have ever seen. And I always like going to shows that have younger crowds because let's face it, people my age, they don't show up at shows the way they used to, right? So it's fun to go with 20s and 30 somethings that still aren't sitting there worried about the cartilage in their knees. So and how long they've been standing and whether the person's too close to them, and So it was just that energy is so contagious. So this guy is amazing. So if you ever get a chance to see at Des Rocks,
okay,
highly recommend it.
Oh, they got a good shirt anyway.
Currently on tour, yeah. And so anyway, so let's jump in. What you got stuck in the old crawl, or did you already consider yourself?
I think the Nats. I think I'm going to stick with that one. I love that.
All right.
Thanks for getting me off key or off track with that. But no,
save it for a future episode. Oh, well, from this point on, we're just going to call them those little bastards.
Those little bastards.
So,
I like that because they are
little bastards. And so, my crawl, I got to thinking, I have a bone to pick with the 1970s.
Ooh, do tell.
Well, just growing up in the 70s, being an early, I was born in 1970, which makes me 41.
Math's not math in there.
I don't math. I don't math. And so I do math when it's convenient for me to do math. So, my strategy this time was to raise my camera angle and tell people I'm 40 so you can't see under my
okay.
So anyway, so in the 70s, and I got to thinking of what we were subjected to. And it actually all started with a sunspot on my arm. Like I've got these sunspots that are just coming out of nowhere. I'm going to look like some old man in Fort Lauderdale. here probably by the end of the month at the rate these things are happening. But then I thought, in the 70s, and it's not our parents' fault. They didn't know any better. Lathering us up in baby oil or coconut oil and sticking us out of the pool and turn around, right? Like bacon. And the pool would just have an oil slick. Like if somebody had dropped a match, I'm pretty sure it would have gone up like an Exxon Valdez kind of thing. It was just covered in oil and grease, and we all smelled great, and we're turning brown, but little did we know we were crazy. So I thought, this was the 70s. It's like in The Christmas Carol when his old partner, Jacob Marley, right? In The Christmas Carol showed up, and he's the chains that he wears from life. I'm wearing the chains of the 70s, because then I got to thinking, well, what other 70s things just ruined me? And you know what other was stuck in my head?
What?
Do you remember the $6 Million Man?
That one?
Yeah, that one. Lee Majors, right?
Yeah.
There was an episode of that show, and I have since confirmed with 5 of my friends whether or not I'm being dramatic here. They somehow said that I am being dramatic, but I'm also correct. Somehow those two things can be.
Well, I guess they're not mutually exclusive.
There was an episode with Bigfoot. It was actually played by Andre the Giant before Andre the Giant was known as anyone by anyone, right? And he basically was covered in, it looked like somebody took Elmer's glue and stuck pubic hair all over him, like literally all over him, like right up to his eyes. And then I saw, chest hair. I was like, where did they get all that? And then they put these like ice blue contact lenses on him.
That sounds petrifying.
Horrifying, scary. And this guy was beating the crap out of the $6 Million Man through most of the episode. And there is a scene in this, like, I want to say it was like an ice tunnel. It was this tunnel that like turned around, and they actually had it at the Hollywood studios or something like that for a while where you could go into it because it became pretty famous. And he was stuck in this. I had nightmares. And this is why I don't bother going to therapy, because I don't need somebody to tell me that I'm a mess because I watched that episode of the $6 Million Man and I'm carrying it with me. So anyway, my crawl is the 70s. So
wow, that's
granted, good things came out of the 70s, but still,
that's just nuts. Honestly, that's just nuts.
So what we're going to talk about today, we kind of mentioned it in the lead-in, which is this idea that choices,
right? We think we have them. Yeah.
We think we have them. We think we make a lot of them on a daily basis. Yet, if that's the case, a question that we have to ask ourselves is, why is it that at a macro level, why are we so predictable? Right? Why does the data show very clearly, depending on the topic, right, that if I come from a particular zip code or a sub-zip code or a neighborhood, right, which might be the same as a sub-zip code, I don't know, or a particular church group, or a particular yoga family, I don't know, I'm just making all kinds of stuff up, a demographic in terms of socioeconomics, right? If I do the whole intersection of, there's our intelligent sounding word, at the intersection of geography, demographic, right, race and culture, income, right? They interplay with each other in very interesting ways. And why is it that when you really go to study this, and when you really look at the data about people's preferences, people's opinions, their political beliefs, their music taste, right?
The words they use.
Right. Why is it that 80% in some cases you can predict this is what they're going to like, right? If everyone was making free choices, and free choices would imply, it's not always 50-50, I get it, but would imply some level of, I don't want to say randomness, right? But sure. But some level, there should be high variability, right? If everybody's making a free choice, notwithstanding certain amounts of influences around them, because I think everybody concedes that some influence matters, right?
Sure.
Like I always laugh about people who will say, hey, everyone has the same chance to do this, that, or the other thing. Yet they're the same ones that are absolutely hyper protective of what school they send their child to, what friends they have, what social media sites they can go to. So in other words, the behavior, their very logical behavior of trying to protect the child's environment is really at odds with this ideological belief, right? That I really shouldn't have to worry about any of that stuff, should I? I mean, shouldn't I just, try to coach him on making the right choice. And I know I'm dramatically oversimplifying this.
Sure.
But because you can write dissertations on just a subsection of what we're going to talk about. But it's just this idea of why is it that we're so predictable? And so, science has really, really told us a lot, right? And it hasn't answered everything with complete clarity, but we have a lot of evidence, right? And I think it all starts with what we've mentioned before. Melissa, I know that we've talked many times that the brain kind of has one major goal in life, right? Well, you remember what it is, right?
It's lazy.
Lazy. Well, let's be nice. It's trying to conserve energy, and that's just an evolutionary process, right? It doesn't want to spend. Good Lord, if I spend every minute investigating every single thing, it's so tiresome. Then I'll be annoying like that Mike guy and his stupid Facebook posts, right? Like I don't have time to look into everything, right? Like I get that. But the reality is that as a species, survival is really a calorie in, calorie out survival, right business. So the quicker you can make a decision with the minimum amount of energy, the more advantageous it is. And I'd say it is, but now I think we need to be careful to say more advantageous it was, because it's not the case anymore, right? We don't need to save every drop of energy. For God's sakes, eat another Pringle. Right, you can think for another minute, right, or 2 more Pringles you can't just eat 2 Pringles. It's kind of impossible. No. Yeah, I know.
Chips.
Yeah. Anything with that much salt, I can't stop. So we're not in a space now where we're so limited on access. Many of us aren't have it like to the amount we're talking about to really think this stuff through. So, wanted to talk a little bit about how this happens, right? So. One of the first things is, going back to something we've mentioned before, I'm just going to lay the groundwork again, which is, you remember old System 1 and System 2, right?
I do.
You want to refresh our viewers' minds on just what System 1 and System 2 was? It sounds really cool, and it's not in your computer.
Sure. System 1 was fast and automatic thinking, that intuitive response that you have. And System 2 was more analytical. You are slowing things down on purpose and really reasoning through things. And we think we use System 2, which is being that thought processor, but we actually rely on System 1.
Yeah, and what's really interesting is people say, no, I definitely reason through things. But for example, David Eagleman's research, a neuroscientist, on what the brain's framework really is that it's deceptive. You feel as if you're reasoning through these things, and it's all happening very quickly. And what really happens, and this ties with Kahneman's work as well, which is it all happens very quickly, and you're already predisposed to make the one decision. And then what's really happening is your brain is acting as a PR agent to rationalize why you're making that choice, right? So I'm going to hang out with these people, or I'm going to have this political opinion, or I'm going to look at choose to ignore this data or accept this data. That decision's already been made. It's just, how are you going to defend yourself?
Sure.
And you can see this in action, right? You see people getting increasingly bizarre when they're trying to defend positions that they are clearly to the point that it kind of gets ridiculous. Like, how could someone so smart, right, start to make these circular arguments, or they just don't hold up the logic structure?
Right. You're contorting themselves into a pretzel to make it make sense.
Yeah, right. And we can see it in real time, but we tend to only notice it when it's someone we don't agree with, right? Like, we don't notice it when we do it, right? We've talked about that, that in other episodes. So, so he talks a lot about this, and he also talks about, the infant brain, which really does this. It's called neural pruning, right? Just like you prune a plant with gnats on it, is that it basically, as we're young, as infants and through adolescence, your brain is actually, it's not, yes, there's connections being made and all that, but no, what really is happening, again, oversimplifying, is the brain is born with tons of brain matter. And actually what it's doing is pruning those connections and deciding what it needs. Right. So there is all kinds of neural connectivity there. But there's not a need to be used. Right. I don't need this connection. Then it literally gets neural pruned. Right. That's why infants are doing it at a rapid rate. That's why being surrounded by conversations, even if they can't talk, is important. That's why kids can learn languages faster than, older people can. So part of the neural pruning process is being affected by your surroundings, right? So if you're a child and you're surrounded by country music because you are growing up in Tennessee, right? The neural pruning is going to be happening around, right? Like the neural pathways that identify that music, that recognize that music, that enjoy the tempo or the flow or the subject matter, and so that's part of what's going on, right? But there's some other stuff going on as well. But I mean, I'm sure you've, seen this stuff in action, and you've got a little infant grandbaby around now that you're probably thinking about this stuff with, right?
Yeah, exactly. She's 4 months, and she right now has figured out that she has a voice, and now she's making sounds, and that's what's happening there, that her brain is making connections between her sounds and the sounds that she's hearing. And it's crazy to watch and know from a different perspective. This is, I have a little bit more background knowledge now than I did when my kids were little and making noise. That is exactly what's going on. And she is laying down those neural pathways. So yeah.
And pruning away stuff that, depending on your reaction or not reaction, like it's just, there's a lot going on under the hood. And so another thing that's going on is known as the familiarity heuristic, the mere exposure effect.
Yeah, this is interesting, and it goes to why you like certain kinds of foods, or why you can tolerate certain climates, or why you would tolerate country music playing in the store. So talk to us more about what that is, Mike.
Yeah, it's actually really simple, and you can see it in action. It's just this idea that the more you're exposed to something, the more that you accept it, and accept and grow to like it, right? One of the things that I always found interesting is if a band that you love, right? This is back when people listened to albums all the way through. But if a band that you love dabbled, let's say you liked rock music, but they kind of got a bug in their crawl about blues or country music, right? Let's say, I don't know, Led Zeppelin or Rolling Stones, like famous for dabbling in other kinds of stuff. Jack White, like who play different types of genres, or even a band like a U2 who on Joshua Tree rips out a couple of flat out country songs, right?
Right.
Anybody else had come to me when I was 17 years old and said, hey, listen to this song, Trip Through Your Wires, which is a U2 porch stomper, right? That's nestled right in Joshua Tree. I would have gone, this sucks. This is country music, right? And the first time I played it through, I was like, this is okay. I'll listen to it because it's the U2 album, right? And it's a pain to fast forward, but just because the next song is great, right? In God's Country or whatever came next is coming up. Yeah. So I'll listen to Trip Through Your Wires. But then I ended up listening to Trip Through Your Wires quite a bit just because it was there. And then before you know it, I ended up liking Trip Through Your Wires. And then before you know it, ends up being a song that I absolutely love. It's a country song. But if you asked 17-year-old me, I still would have told you I hated country music. So what was happening, right? I'm not the only person to do this, I hope. And it's this idea that the more I allowed myself just through my love of the band in general to be exposed to this song that really was nothing more than a country song, the more I put down that barrier and gave it a chance, right? So that familiarity, I'm like, oh yeah, I know this tune, I like this. Or if you've ever traveled somewhere, I like to travel through the South, blues country, for me talk about that in the past. And don't get me wrong, yeah, it just feels like feels right. Like, we're driving in the car through Mississippi. I want to play the soundtrack through Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? It just sounds right, like it just, and we're tapping and singing and having a good old rip-roaring time. Or as they said in the movie, that's some mighty fine picking and singing. Picking and singing, I think it was. That's some mighty fine picking and singing. I think that line.
Nicely done. I have not seen that movie.
Oh, Melissa.
I know. It's on my list. It's so funny that you actually called up that movie, because we were in Washington, D.C. last week, and somebody else was talking about the same movie and the music in it. So I got to bump it back up to the top of my list.
And it's actually the Coen brothers just took the Odyssey and set it in Depression era South.
Okay.
It's so good. But anyway, and George Clooney is hilarious in it, as is the whole
I have seen some clips, and yes, he is. The clips I've seen, he's really funny.
I could start using the other lines from that movie once you've
And I
seen
wouldn't
it.
even, yeah, I would say until I've seen it, I wouldn't even know what you were doing.
So let's
No
talk
way.
about some of this. So let's talk about some of what I would say evidence. So, for example, political beliefs, right? So
Okay.
there's this concept around political inheritance, and for example, upwards of 70% of teenagers share their parents' political opinions, right? And that seems logical,
Sure.
right? Like I understand that you're surrounded by, now some people go, well, I have a rebellious teenager and they're not going. We're going to get to that in a second, right? But what are the odds of someone that grows up in a Catholic household being Catholic? They're significantly higher than someone who's not. What are the odds of someone growing up in a Mormon community being Mormon? Significantly higher than someone who's not, right? Like these are just indisputable facts, right? And it's not saying Catholic good, Catholic bad, Mormon good, Mormon bad. No interest in that conversation. The conversation is there's clearly an effect, right, of the environment shaping these beliefs that are going to, for this child, when they be likely going to be the foundation of who they see themselves as being, right? And it's going to be their core. Yet that core has clearly been shaped by their surroundings. So and again, people are going to, there's a counter argument here. We're going to come back to that in just a second. But political inheritance is one of them. There are parts of the country that are deep colored one way or deep colored another way, red or blue, and they're getting increasingly so. Right. And so if you grow up in a deep red, I've mentioned before, my family's all from Ohio, and there's counties in that state that will never vote anything but red, and the reddest of the red if possible. And it's not even, there is no conversation. This is what's going to happen with, 80% of the voting bloc or probably more for the people who actually go out to vote are going to vote in. So where you were born and where you're growing up is having a dramatic effect on your political beliefs, but yet these are beliefs that we consider to be fundamental to our core. Right. And I know we're dabbling a little bit in morality, which is where some more of Jonathan Haidt's research is really fascinating. Is he did a lot of work on morality and political affiliation and the belief in terms of moral beliefs and moral code. And he basically, through his research found that there's actually morality is, I want to say it's 7 different types of morality that expresses in 7 different ways. It may not be 7, but it's a series of different ways that morality can be expressed. And people who identify as being like further on a conservative spectrum or a liberal spectrum, everyone has these moral tokens. They disperse them into different buckets differently. Right. So people who are of a more conservative viewpoint, their belief, their moral code is more invested in a particular few of these 7 pillars, whereas people who would identify as liberal take their morality tokens, making something up here, and putting them in different ones. They all have these morality indicators. They're just located in different places. Right. So if you're born in a particular area of the country, if you're born in San Francisco or deep red Ohio, there's a really good chance I can predict your political affiliation, pretty easily. Right. And that's I'm not Johnny Carson on the old, what was he, hold the envelope up to his head? I don't have the I'm dating myself there, but
yeah, there you go.
I'm not Jambi from Pee Wee's Playhouse. Mecca like a high, mecca Heidi ho. I can't predict people's political affiliation, but if I know where you're from, I know a few other things about you, I probably can, right? So it's also interesting because there's sociological data showing that Americans now, this is becoming a self-reinforcing loop, that are moving to neighborhoods where people who share their exact lifestyle and political beliefs already live, right? So we're concentrating ourselves into geographic echo chambers, which is just going to produce more people that are pretty much guaranteed, right, to have this particular, opinion, right, or set of opinions or that kind of thing, right? Yep. So, there's a lot going on there, and there's some really interesting stuff too in terms of how we're being targeted with this, right? This is where the algorithms for social media, right? What we're talking about on this show is not groundbreaking. We've said this before. This is deep-seated stuff in marketing land. Right. People are making money off of what we're sharing, and they have been for a long time. Yep. It's no secret. It's not a secret cabal that is, accessing some information that no one else has. It's in the textbooks. It's there. They've been using it for a long time. It's not even seedy. You could question whether it's, you could have conversations about morality and ethics. But if you know how to manipulate people, and your job is to manipulate people, you're kind of supposed to manipulate people, right?
That's right. That's marketing 101.
And so one of the main, targets now is using the algorithms in our social media feeds, what they can learn about people, to predict all kinds of stuff, and then target you with specific types of advertising and that sort of thing. So we're part of the way through this. Are we making sense so far? Do you think we're?
I think you're spot on, and I think that one of the things that people are becoming increasingly aware of that maybe they weren't before is the algorithm, and how much it really, really does dictate what you see, what you hear, what kinds of music you're exposed to, the ads that you get for shopping. I mean, and they're good, because I end up buying stuff at 10 o'clock at night on Instagram, and that I really didn't need, but I did because the ad was really good. So it's highly impactful. So yeah, I do think that that you're onto something here. It's driven by your zip code. It's driven by the things that you're purchasing. It's driven by what you stop and pause and watch. For even a few seconds as you're scrolling through your feed.
Right.
And that information is huge.
Yeah. And everybody seems to recognize that the effect in society is happening. But if you try to point to the why, people get resistant, right? Because it's an implication of either at least being complicit in the process, right? And this isn't about right or wrong, right? If we get into who's right, who's wrong, and you're saying I'm dumb, right? Not at all, right? There's, as a matter of fact, for example, what I'm sharing right now is research done by people a lot smarter than I am. I'm just talking about it.
Right.
And this is a case of the only way we can get out of this kind of spiral, some would argue a death spiral when it comes to our division, is to start looking in the mirror and recognizing that this isn't an everyone else problem, it's an everyone problem, right? And it's not a problem because of good or bad. We always want to stick it in the good box or the bad box. It's a problem because we're human and we've been wired to do it this way.
Right.
And we're wired to deal with the amount of flood of information and data that we're being hit with. And so, there's lots more out there in terms of, predictability about decision-making and outcomes. I would encourage people to look into it. Some of the real interesting stuff that's come out over the last decade includes research on, the myth of upward mobility in America. Right. There's this idea that, hey, if you're born in America, anybody can become anything, but the numbers don't back that up. Right. Right. And so, and there's not, and it is an example when you start to have a conversation with somebody and you press on that. Right. And you say that's a nice idea. We all like it. And is your opportunity better in America than any other place? Probably. I haven't measured that.
I would make an assumption, right? You would make an assumption.
Not bad. It's clearly not bad. People in Finland might disagree, or France, I don't know. But, we're at least in an upper echelon when it comes to having some opportunity here, right? But the notion that anyone can become anything if they just make that correct choice at the right time just doesn't bear out based on data. And so if I can look at a low socioeconomic, let's just take an example. If let's take the poorest. I don't know have you ever been to New Orleans?
Yeah, I have.
Okay, so last time I was in New Orleans, and I don't know if I shared this story before, so I'm not going to make it long, but I had one day left before we were flying home to Phoenix, and instead of going to the Garden District and seeing something beautiful that would keep me cheerful on the way home from a wonderful week-long trip to the South, I thought, you know what? I think I'd rather go see where the flood.
Where Hurricane Katrina went through,
where it breached the levees, right?
Tremaine is a good example of that.
Right. So I thought, let's go to the Ninth Ward. So we drove over to the Ninth Ward, and it was the most depressing experience. And I've been in poor neighborhoods, not like I haven't been to them, but this was really, and again, this is 15 years after Katrina. And it still looks like very much like a third world country. But even when you get out of the flooded neighborhoods, it's just, and you sit and watch these kids, we stopped at a convenience store, and you watch these kids come out their front door, and some of the other people in the neighborhood saying, hey, little man, come over here, and blah, 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 blah. And I remember telling my friend that I was traveling with, I said, do you in any world not look at this and see that this kid has, that little kid on that porch right there has very little chance of doing anything other than living and dying in this community if he's lucky, right?
Yeah.
And that this is not going to be a place that presents him with opportunity in spite of the best efforts of some people. Maybe sometimes it's the family, sometimes it's the local school, sometimes it's the local church. There's going to be times, but when you live in a place like that, and you don't have the support networks and you don't have money, to prop you up in terms of getting tutoring or after school programming. I mean, we all know this, right?
Right.
Or multiple layers of family support. You don't get as many chances. You might get one.
Yeah.
You ain't get 20.
There are outliers. And so, there are going to be people that come out of that kind of environment and they had the right hand up. They knew the right person that got them connected to the right whatever it was, and they'll be successful and be out of that environment that they were in. But they are the exception and not the rule.
Right. Yeah. And somebody said to me, I knew a family where there were 5 coming off of a really rough area in the reservation. And they said, well, he made it. That's proof that it can happen. I said, no, him making it is part of the evidence that that's not correct, because he has 4 siblings, 2 of which have been to jail, 2 of which can't get off the reservation, all of which are on, assistance to try to survive. Right. So, and out of every 10, that number is going to kind of hold, right? You might see a bump here and that's just statistics, right? It's just statistics. This is why we'll do another episode on, we should have spent less time on algebra and calculus and more time on statistics in school, right? But it's probability and statistics in action. So when you want to make someone uncomfortable, just say to them, okay, so if I go to this poor neighborhood in New Orleans and you can see that I can go into a classroom of first graders and I can look right them in the eye. And I know people are going to say, well, this sounds terrible, but if you don't acknowledge the monster, you can't slay the monster, right? Like the monster is lack of opportunity. If I walk into a classroom in some of the poorest communities in America and I look at those kids and I know based on boatloads of data and prior that a large chunk of those children will never reach the goals that their parents have for them or their school has for them, and are going to fall well short of any goals they may even have for themselves. There has to be a reason, right? It can't just be that, well, everybody has the exact same chance. It just happens that 8 out of 10 in that neighborhood always make the wrong one.
Right. And that goes to the another argument that geography dictates how your predisposition to intelligence, openness to new experience, those kinds of things. It is the environment that sets some of those boundaries for you, whether it's about your personality or what you like or don't like. Those are things that are very tied to where you live, who you are around on a day-to-day basis, and what your access to those opportunities are.
Yeah, and I think the research has shown pretty clearly that what happens with people that come from, and I know we've kind of I've turned this into a conversation about socioeconomics and education and opportunity, but it is a good example and it's our area of most expertise. Sure. But the research is pretty clear on what happens, based on, the where, and what's really been demonstrated, especially recently in some of the research, is that it's not that you can't go through a child's life and find occasions where they might have had an opportunity. It's how many opportunities do they get? Right. So, for example, when I was a principal of a very affluent school, I watched some kids make mistake after mistake after mistake after mistake, like big ones, right? Ones that would have gotten them kicked out of school if their parent didn't know somebody, or if their parent wasn't the lawyer from the television. Like I had one who was literally the lawyer whose picture was on the back of the telephone book back when we had those. And if you didn't think that guy was going to fight to keep his kid in school and not thrown out, right?
Oh, sure.
Or they had tons of money to, start providing tutoring services after school, or a mom didn't work and she'd come in, and I think of one student in particular, and this woman poured everything, as she should. This is wonderful. She's being a wonderful parent. This isn't a class warfare thing. This
right. Sure.
Child have it, right? But the reality is they don't. So if I look at some of those kids from different communities and I say, if they made any of the choices that little guy in my affluent community made about 10 times, he's already done, right? So so anything else, and I know, people are this is where we've talked about, there's going to be this inside pull of like, wow, wait a minute, my predisposition, right, on my political beliefs or my religious beliefs is going to pull me out of this conversation. I'm going to be uncomfortable. I probably turned it off by now because you're trying to say that no one should be held accountable for their behaviors, because like extrapolating a bunch of stuff out, right? Like that is not what we're saying. What we are saying though is that by rooting our understanding of each other in reality and data, from good research gives us our best connection to her. And I know people like to pick at that. That's a whole nother conversation, but it's still better than, I think, I believe, I feel, right? That's far removed from, right. From what is actually happening in the real world. Right. So let's hit on this idea of the not me defense, right? You've heard of this, right?
Fill me in. Tell me more.
So the not me defense is what pretty much anybody who's still with us right now is thinking, right? That's true. This happens. Oh my God, this happens. I'm thinking about my grandpa this and my neighbor that, but not me. I'm too clever, right? I'm too clever for these things. And so what we have to understand is, yes, us. The same tug we're all being tugged, right? It doesn't mean, I know this is not a PG show, but it did feel weird when I just said we're all being tugged. I apologize for that. Anybody who took offense to it. She wrote, don't cut that out. It's perfectly fine. No one's listening. But we're all having that pull, right? Of the predisposition of our biology, of our brains, of the shortcuts it's trying to take.
Yep.
And so yes, some people by having these kinds of conversations can start to mitigate that. But it's everyone. And so, for example, if I take 10 people or 50 people from the exact same neighborhood, the same demographic, social circle, all of them will fiercely defend that their beliefs are independent, completely logical, lead to their current beliefs, right? Because they're all independent thinkers. Yet, if 80% of them voted exactly the same way, are buying similar trucks or cars, are listening to the same kind of music, the statistical possibility that these are all people just making decisions independent of their context is zero.
Yeah.
And it's okay to say, I get that. I recognize that, because good to be found in all of these spaces, right? So it's not about rejecting what anybody believes. It's about recognizing how it got there, which also allows you to understand other people's beliefs and how they got there. And then just remember that you're going to do a really good job of rationalizing. No, I choosing this political belief because, but that is that PR agent in your brain. That's what your brain's number one job is, to actually rationalize your intuitive behavior. So there's another little nugget here on this idea of the not me. I thought this was kind of interesting, and I hadn't heard this part before. A lot of the stuff I've been into for a while, but this I hadn't heard of, and it's called the narcissism of small differences. And it caught my attention because I just love the term. Like, that'd be a great band name, narcissism of small differences. I guess it was coined by Freud, and it's a psychological phenomenon where people who are overwhelmingly similar hyperfixate on microscopic differences so that they feel unique.
It's really interesting.
Yeah. So a listener to our show might, I hope they will, angrily email us, because that would mean we're getting email.
Yep.
Emails the show to say that they are nothing like their neighbors because they listen to indie folk while the rest of the town listens to mainstream country. Right? To a sociologist, looking at that data, those two people are still practically identical. But the human brain magnifies that 2% deviation, right? Yeah, you listen to indie folk, which is actually kind of connected to country music, but it's still a different type of music. But that's literally this much of what a sociologist, might be, what might be going on. Now, the last one that I want to share on this lone wolf piece I think is fascinating. And I know some people personally that this really applies to. And it's referred to as the pendulum fallacy. And people frequently claim ultimate independence by pointing out that they believe the exact opposite of their parents.
Ooh, so I'm getting Footloose vibes here.
Yeah, or the absolute opposite of their hometown, right? Or they like different stuff than their best friends or whatever. However, reacting purely in opposition to an environment means that the environment is still dictating your behavior entirely, just in reverse, right? True independence, or true independent thought would look completely randomized, but if your entire worldview is a photo negative of your zip code, the environment is still drew the map. You just decided to drive backwards.
That is very interesting. I had not heard that before. And wow, for those people that thought I'm going to be doing the exact opposite because that means I'm not like you, but in reality, you are. Ooh, that's painful.
Yeah, and it's predisposed. It's a predisposal. It's not something that's going to hold every time, right? Part of what we like to do on the show is acknowledge where it hits us. And I have always been a novelty seeker, right? My whole life, I've been pretty much a novelty seeker, and so I can honestly say, like, I'm kind of normal avoidant, right? I try to, for the most part, and it's not because I choose, it's just more appealing to me. So I understand that. So I always have to kind of ask myself, am I choosing this to be different, or am I choosing this for any legitimate reason, or right? And sometimes there's a whole lot of things to untangle there, right? Like I get it. But there are these people who will, there's a couple different types, well, there's more than that, but the first type is the type that is automatically like, a novelty seeker or a rebellious spirit, right? The type of person that's like, if my parents are conservative, I'm going to be a rebel, and I'm going to put a Bernie Sanders sign in my window upstairs, right? Like, or if my parents are this, I'm going to do that. My parents like country music, I'm not going to, right? Like, whatever. There's that person. And so those people are still, who they think they are is still being shaped by their environment, like you said, but in reverse. There's also the other type of person who has a bit of who has this notion of being a kind of stuck in multiple worlds. I want to be a free thinker. I think of myself as a free thinker and a radical and somebody who's a bit different than everyone around me, and I don't just fit in a box, right? But I end up adopting or developing even these views that are still very adjacent to home base for me, right? That still are very much part of my original ideology, or part of my, what I've grown up with, or part of, right? And I'm going to try to twist and turn and pretzel and come up with things that are versions of that, but are still very closely related. And this is where you start to see kind of those offshoots, right? Of almost like breakaway versions of ideologies or political movements, or right. And so you're still comfortable because you're still like, if the two sides, let's say you started out on the left, right? Hard left, and all your friends are over there, but you kind of like, you're kind of thinking about some other stuff, but then you kind of end up developing this kind of pseudo liberal, viewpoint, worldview. You do a ton of reading on it. So you feel super smart. Right, you find some obscure researchers and you point to them all the time, but if someone were to say to you, "All right, you have to pick which of the two sides you think is going to adopt you into their family," if you had to be adopted, you're still going to go, "My liberal friends would adopt me," right? I'm still close enough to them, right, to fit in. So you're still staying at home, so to speak, but you're doing something different. And if you look at your environment, we'll see some of these people. It's less common, but one of the things that I will say, and I know this is going to border on, and I'm going to encourage my friends on the, I think it's okay to say a political statement that we'll wrap up as long as we point to both sides on it, for sure. And I'll give you a perfect example. And I know that, Turning Point USA has obviously been a topic of conversation for quite a while, for a long time, because of the political activism and the influence they've had. And there's no denying from a political science standpoint how powerful and influential this group has been. Charlie Kirk being a major figure on the American right, horrific end of his life that you don't want to see happen to anybody, regardless of what they believe, and what your beliefs are. However, one of the things that you can point to, and don't worry, anybody who's on the right, I'm going to point to this kind of behavior on the other side too, that one of the claims that comes out of the Turning Point camp is, we are a place where all ideas are welcome. right? We are, Charlie valued discourse and debate and so all opinions are welcome. I look at that and I say, on the surface, you're right. They're welcome at the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
But the expectation is that those opinions are to evolve and you are to basically fall in line with the rest of the group, right? And how do I know that to be the case? Because if you go down to the Turning Point USA conference, which was held down here, right? And you go around and talk to people, and I know a lot of people that are part of that group, wonderful people. There isn't any variance. There isn't much. Let me say there's not a lot of daylight, right? So if it was this big tent concept that, that people from all kinds of could be a part of this movement, it doesn't appear to be what's actually happening. The idea is come to us with your beliefs. However, our expectation is we're going to change those beliefs because we're going to kind of mercilessly beat you down in a debate and prove you wrong, right? And then you're going to join us, right? That's kind of the expectation. There aren't a lot of counterpoints hanging out down there. I didn't see a lot of. So then
the question becomes, Mike, so the choice in that, right? Since we're talking about, does that choose you or do you choose that? Where's the choice? The choice is having the conversation and stepping into the arena with them anyway. Is that the choice, or is the choice when you?
Well, the first choice is isn't a choice at all. It's recognizing how you got to the point where you're finding yourself there.
Right.
Right. So what is the, we've all seen the diagram of the iceberg, right? The tip sticking out. And
absolutely.
What is underneath the water with me? How did I get here? Right. If I go to this and I talk to these people, do I already pretty much know I'm going to fall in line? Or
fair point.
The best is to give yourself future choice points and say, can I find something I disagree with them on? And if I can't, what are the odds that something else is happening here, right? Is this not just some sort of social adaptation by me, right? We know that humans are mortified of social exclusion, right? We don't want to be left out. You see it in the cafeteria in elementary school, and then you see it for the rest of your life, right? Like, you don't want to be left out. So it'd be much easier to just either keep quiet or flat out just adopt new beliefs than to try to start a, turning point for drag queens segment, right? It's never good, right? You don't see that sort of thing because you'd be ostracized, right? Yep. And so the question is, can you find things with people who you consider to be quote unquote like-minded that you disagree on? And are you afraid to say anything about it? And not to try to change anybody's mind, but just to say, hey, this is what I think. And sometimes it's like, I don't even know yet. And we're going to talk about this in a future episode, that it's okay to say, I don't know. I don't know whether I should be upset about, I just use drag shows as a joke. I read an article about that earlier, in Ohio. But do I know what the effect of drag shows are on a community? I don't, right? Like but I do know that I come from a hyper liberal or a hyper conservative or a moderate community where I've been brought up to feel a certain way. So I'm probably going to just accept drag queens are A, harmful, B, not harmful. They should get off their back based on my predisposition. And then if I'm a particularly intelligent or interested person, I'm going to go out and find evidence that I'm correct. Right. And so how do we get into these, tents? That's how. So, I said, though, I can do the same thing on either side, right? Now, it looks different on the left than the right. It's really hard to deny that it doesn't look different because there's a manifestation of the partisanship in one of the parties that look different than the other side, right? One has gone much more to where the what would be considered the far extreme of that particular mindset has become the dominant voice of the party. Whether you think that's right or wrong is not the point. The point is you would not find people more to the right generally than the people in charge of the Republican Party, right? Whereas if you look at the left, there are people that are pretty far left and radical, left, or as the president would call them, radical left-wing lunatics, but they're not actually in control, right? Like if you look at, the Omars from Minnesota or the AOCs or I asked a friend of mine the other day, I said, can you name one thing that any of those people have actually had passed? that looks like, and but they're on TV a lot, right? Like we've talked about this. And so the reality is they may gain control, right? There was a time when the far right didn't have control of the Republican Party. Now they do. There's actually probably an improved chance that the far left could get control of the Democratic Party because of a response to the right, like extremism breeds extremism kind of concept. But it happens on the other side as well. It just looks different, right? Because you don't have this public facing as much kind of, you don't have a turning point equivalent so much on the left to play with here. But you do have, plenty of thought experiments. If you walk into a room of I don't know, hipster liberals, I live in downtown and there's a lot of, liberal thought and, really interesting discussion about social justice and, and I'm not here to make comments either way on any of it. Right. At least not in this platform. But if I were to walk into that room, break out an espresso, share some espressos and, grow a beard and cut myself a new modern mullet
and start doing this.
Yeah, well, that's a little 60s. I'm trying to think like the modern day. And if I were to start to say, and I'm not telling you that this is true, but if I walked in there and I said, would I be afraid to walk into that room and say, yeah, being homeless isn't a crime, but having a homeless person come into your neighborhood and leave a bunch of trash in your front yard and shoot heroin isn't it? Right? I'm just using this as an example. Right. The types of things that I know for a fact. This is a conversation I had with someone a couple of weeks ago, and they mentioned this idea, and and I thought, yeah, that's the kind of idea you'd be afraid to say because you're going to get some stink eye, right? You're not allowed to. You can't say that. You have to use some of the coded language, right? Like there's language that's accepted in certain circles that kind of signals you, right? It's the virtue signaling language that you belong in that group, and so.
But that goes to choice architecture, yes? I mean, when you feel totally free to make a decision or to choose to do or be something, and you ignore the environment that you're in that actually wrote all of the rules about it and set the boundaries up ahead of time. And even though we think that we're independently choosing a political stance or a lifestyle choice, or how you feel about homelessness, you're really that choice is being determined by, again, your zip code and how you grew up and who you grew up around and the social ecosystem that you find yourself within.
Right. Or, and we may have left our zip code issue long behind. Like there's these lots that we're oversimplifying, right?
Of course. Big time.
But, we may have moved past the zip code thing. I moved I'm out and right. So maybe there's still there's still gravity, right, from the zip code. But now you're moving into an environment where you're creating new ecosystems, right? So if your question about what do I do when you walk into a room like that, what do I do, is such a good one because I think that what people have to ask themselves is, okay, they have to know because they listen to this show. If I have, let's say I feel very strongly about social justice for immigrants, right? And so I am drawn to the Democratic Party. I'm just going to use this. I'm going to use an example. If I'm going to get drawn to the Democratic Party because I'm a big believer in dreamers, right?
Okay.
So I'm not doing a subsection of immigration right here, right? Like, so if for those who aren't aware, we understand that dreamers are people that, that were born in this country, right? They were brought, they didn't do anything wrong. They didn't commit a crime by being here, right? There was something with the parents that so they, under the Obama administration, they were granted, dreamer status, and which meant they weren't going to end up getting shipped back to a country they've never been to, right? And so that's a certain that's a subsection. It's a micro conversation in the immigration, mess.
Yep.
So let's say I believe strongly, and I have a friend. I went to Trevor Brown High School over in West Phoenix. I have a friend who is now, being threatened with being deported by the Trump administration because, but he's a dreamer. He's doing everything he can to do things the right way. And he's scared to death because he's never been to Venezuela. And now he's 17 and he doesn't know what's going to happen when he gets back there. And so now I'm fired up because this is my friend, right? And so now I'm going to start to look into, well, how can I get involved in this? So now I find myself, I'm at college, I find a group that, is immigration an immigration support type political activist group. So I get into this group, right, with this almost myopic view of this is what I want to focus on, dreamers. But the reality is once you enter that ecosystem, you're going to be surrounded by people who are doing work far beyond dreamer work, right? It's going to be all kinds of immigration work. It's going to be a wide range of farther right and farther left, but not farther right, mostly farther left, right? And it's hard to say just right or left on this topic, but there's a lot of different questions in the immigration umbrella. And there's going to be people that have sought that out as well. Odds are they're going to be probably a hyper liberal group, right?
Yeah.
And what this person would have to recognize, because they listen to the show again, is there is a very good chance that if I don't pay attention, my other political choices are going to be made for me. Not because I'm knowingly outsourcing them, but because now I'm entering a social group that is to have the answers for everything. And because we agree on this, I'm going to find myself adopting that and that and that without the same level of scrutiny or thought or personal experience like I had with the dreamer, right? And it doesn't mean that when it's all said and done, I don't end up there. Maybe I do, right? But I have to understand that it's not just a reasonable expectation. It's actually logical to think that I should walk into a room with people and there's 20 different topics at hand and I should disagree with them on some of them. If we agree on everything,
you're in an echo chamber.
It's an echo chamber and it's groupthink.
Yeah.
But I still radically defend my belief that this is me, this is what I believe in, right? But the reality is you're really being shaped. You're like a stone in a river, right? Being bounced off the rocks, turning you into what you've become. And so, we've taken this in a lot of different directions, but I think it's super important because if we don't recognize, one of the takeaways from the show I want people to have is a not takeaway. Do not walk away from this episode thinking Mike and Melissa just advocated for no personal accountability, right? Because if you're born in a zip code, you should get to do what you want because he was poor and what can you do about it, right? That is not at all what we're saying. But you can't get to the problem solving if we live in this fantasy world, right? Where we don't acknowledge what is real and what's happening. And my proof for me is the current state of what we're all living in. Everyone's complaining about it, but no one wants to say, well, how did we get here? Right. And this is how we got here. We know how we got here. Scientists know how we got here. Social scientists know how we got here. Political theorists know how we got there. Right. Madison Avenue certainly knows how we got here.
Yep.
And if we all don't start taking some responsibility for not just prior thinking, so in a weird way, we're advocating for more accountability. Right. But it's intellectual accountability and recognizing the answers aren't that simple.
And they start here, not there.
They start right here. So there's so much more that we could talk about. And I have more in my notes, but we're just not going to have time to. But, maybe we have a chance to revisit some of these topics when we do one of our one of our aperitif episodes again.
I love it. Good idea.
I will be doing. So, to sum up the, kind of the concept here is, while we fiercely defend our individuality, and our right to choose our own paths, the overwhelming evidence from neuroscience, sociology, and psychology suggests that choices are largely prepackaged for us. From the music we listen to the politicians we vote for, our geography, our family, our local environment, our schools. These are kind of invisible authors, right, of the kind of the story of our lives. We aren't mindless robots, right, to be sure. But we are playing with we're playing with a stacked deck. And, the only way to counter that is through awareness. And no, this is my natural tendency, not because I'm bad, not because I'm weak, not because I'm dumb, not because I'm evil, but because I'm a human being and we all have it. And so how can I learn to start to filter my own thinking and be part of the solution that I want to be a part of? So, the question is, do we need to, for our verdict for this episode, do we need to unlearn this idea that we're independent analytical thinkers? And I think we would both give thumbs up to that. That's one that belongs in the dumpster. And I think in terms of, how many thumbs up out of 10, I think it's a 10 out of 10. I don't think there's much debate when it comes to evidence. If you want to give it a 9 just to be, East Germany with your scorecards, you're welcome to. There was another dated reference, right? If we have any young people listening to the show, like, what's East Germany?
East Germany.
There's East Germany. So thanks everyone. Our next episode we're super excited about. We are gonna really kind of dive into some very interesting stuff that we're prepping for right now. Super excited. And speaking of future episodes, some of you, we've gotten good feedback on our health episode. I don't know if it's because we referenced the pit so much, or if it was because the health content was so good, or if it was because the guests were better than the hosts.
Could have been.
But we've gotten some conversation about wanting to do something like that again. I know that Julia, the cardiac nurse, had a whole lot more content to share, especially around women's health, women's heart health and stuff. And so we've even had some conversation about doing an episode specifically about that. So we have more ideas than we've had time to film episodes for. But stay with us, hang in there. Remember, you can, email us. You can leave comments. But Melissa will be the first to tell you that the number one responsibility that you have is to
make sure you subscribe, like the episode, but make sure that you hit that subscribe button, because when you do that, it lifts us up in the algorithms that we've been talking about, and make sure that other people can find us. So please do make sure that you like our episode. Leave a comment, even if it's just a 5-star review. We'd love to have it, and make sure that you are hitting that subscribe button.
And if you see it on Facebook, if this shows up in your Facebook feed, also be doing us a big favor just by hitting the Facebook share. Just posting it on your wall or sharing it with your friends. That would be a really big help. And again, I can't stress enough, we don't have aspirations for this show. We're not looking to, become part of big podcast.
Nope.
Like big tobacco, a big pharmacy, a big podcast. We're not going to get gobbled up by, one of these podcast networks. We just do it for fun and because we think it's interesting. And, I don't know, for me, I'd like to at least, on my deathbed someday say, well, at least I shared everything that went through my head, for better or worse. Usually for worse, but whatever. There'll be a long record of it. And when they build an AI bot of me long after my death, like those Black Mirror episodes, they'll be able to do all this stuff to create. So bad news for all of you. There might be me living forever. So anyway, thanks everyone. Thanks for tuning in. Can't wait to see you, engage with you, and have more conversation with you in our future episodes. Take care.
Thanks, everybody.